Welcome, you curious minds, to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're diving into the really intricate world of global climate change efforts.
Yeah, it's quite a maze.
We've pulled together key insights from a source document, climatechangeorganizations.pdf, and we're going to try and walk you through the timeline, the major players.
And the key mechanisms, how the world actually tries to tackle this huge challenge.
Exactly.
It's a system that's, it's been evolving for decades now.
Right.
Our goal for this deep dive is basically to distill the core stuff, help you see how all these different pieces fit together.
And maybe highlight some crucial details that, often get lost.
Definitely. Think of it as your kind of focused briefing on international climate policy.
That's right. We're going to trace how these efforts have evolved from the very first agreements
right up to the tools and concepts used today.
So you'll get a clear sense of not just what these organizations do, but, why their work is just so vital for the planet.
For our future, really.
Okay, so to begin, we really need to understand the foundation, the cornerstone of it all.
You mean the UNFCCC?
Yes, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this wasn't just some casual chat.
No, not at all. It was formally established back in June '92.
In Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, at that big UN summit, UNCAD.
And critically, it's a multilateral legal instrument. It has teeth, in theory,
binding the nations that joined.
And a key insight here is that the UNFCCC, it really created the basic structure for everything that followed.
It put the problem on the map officially.
Yes, formally acknowledged climate change as a global issue and set up that framework for countries to cooperate to try and prevent dangerous global temperature rises.
And a lot of countries signed on early.
Our source says 195 parties joined. Parties basically meaning countries, so broad commitment right from the start.
And these parties, the countries, they operate within this UNFCCC structure. It's not just one thing, is it?
No, it's quite an ecosystem. You have the Conference of the Parties, the COP.
That's the big decision-making body, right? Like the main meeting point?
Exactly, the supreme decision maker. Then you have these essential support bodies.
Like SBSTA.
Right, the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, making sure the science is sound.
And SBI.
The subsidiary body for implementation, focused on how things actually get done on the ground.
Makes sense. There's also a COP Bureau and the Secretariat. Where's that based?
Bonn in Germany. And it supports, I think, 18 UN organizations involved in this.
Wow, so why so many different bodies? It sounds complex.
Well, it kind of has to be. It reflects the sheer complexity of global climate governance.
You need the science part, the implementation part.
Exactly. You need ongoing scientific assessment. You need detailed oversight of how countries are implementing things, plus continuous negotiation on everything from cutting emissions mitigation to coping with impacts adaptation.
So each body has its specific job.
Precisely. It's a multifaceted process.
Okay, let's trace the journey through time a bit. The UNFCCC was the start, but then came decades of talks, agreements.
And, increasingly ambitious goals.
Right.
In this timeline, it really shows how the world's understanding and maybe commitment evolve.
From just reporting on the problem.
Trying to build concrete strategies and eventually legally binding rules.
So let's go way back. 1988.
The IPCC gets established. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change by WMO and UNE.
And then just 2 years later, 1990.
IPCC's first big assessment report, that was huge.
Saying, yes, human activities are a major source of greenhouse gases.
Undeniably. And the Second World Climate Conference happened that year too.
Then 92, the UN General Assembly sets up the committee.
The Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, which led directly to the UNFCCC in Rio that same year. Things moved fast then.
Okay, so UNFCCC is in place.
Oh.
Then comes something really significant, the Kyoto Protocol.
Yes, Kyoto. Adopted December 97 in Japan, this was a landmark.
How so? What made it different?
Well, unlike the UNFCCC, which was a framework, Kyoto was an international, legally binding agreement. And it set specific emission reduction targets, mainly for developed countries.
And it introduced some new ideas, didn't it? These mechanisms.
Crucially, yes. The flexible market mechanisms, that was the real innovation. Ways to help countries meet targets more easily or cost effectively.
So tell us about those. How did they work?
There are three main types. Joint implementation, JI emission trading. and the Clean Development Mechanism, the CDM.
Emission trading sounds like what it is.
Pretty much. If a country cut emissions below its target, it had spare allowances it could sell to a country struggling to meet its target. A carbon market, essentially.
Okay. And the CDM.
That allowed developed countries to, say, fund a renewable energy project in a developing country.
Like a solar farm or something.
Exactly. And they'd earn carbon credits for the emissions reduced or avoided there, which they could count towards their own Kyoto target.
So finding the cheapest way to cut emissions globally.
That was the idea. The source also mentions things like offset trading or baseline and credit trading, different ways of generating these tradable emission permits from verified reductions.
Right. Moving on. 2007. Bali. COP13.
Yeah, the Bali Climate Change Conference, they adopted the Bali Roadmap.
What was that about?
The key part was the Bali Action Plan. It set out a new negotiating process, broadening the scope beyond just emission cuts.
How so?
It had 5 main pillars: a shared long-term vision, mitigation, adaptation, technology transfer, and importantly, financing. Really widened the conversation.
Okay. Then 2009, Copenhagen, COP15. That one got a lot of attention.
It did. The outcome, the Copenhagen Accord, well, it was non-binding. That was a bit of a disappointment for some.
But it still did something useful.
Oh, yes. It laid important groundwork, it aimed for deep industrial emission cuts, and significantly, it included that pledge of financial support for developing countries.
The $100 billion number.
That's the one. USD, $100 billion per year by 2020 from developed nations. That really put climate finance front and center.
Next up, Cancun. COP16 in 2010.
Cancun agreements were formally adopted there, and this was huge for finance.
How?
This is where the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, and the Adaptation Fund were officially established.
So creating the actual piggy banks for that climate finance?
Basically, yes. Crucial channels to get money flowing for mitigation and adaptation in developing countries.
Fast forward to 2013, Warsaw. COP19.
Warsaw had some important outcomes, too. A key one was formally establishing the REDD Plus mechanism.
Remind us what REDD Plus is.
Reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, plus conservation, sustainable forest management, enhancing carbon stocks.
So, paying countries to protect their forests.
In essence, yes. Recognizing forests as vital carbon sinks. Developed countries supporting developing nations' efforts.
Anything else from Warsaw?
Yes. The Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage was also set up, dealing with impacts you just can't adapt to.
Okay, now we get to a really pivotal moment. Yeah. Paris. COP21 in 2015. This feels like a big one.
Oh, it absolutely was. A true breakthrough, many called it.
Adopted by almost everyone.
195 nations, yeah. Aiming not just to fight climate change, but build a sustainable, low-carbon future.
And that temperature goal?
The core objective: limit global average temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and pursue efforts for 1.5 degrees.
That's ambitious. How is Paris different from, say, Kyoto?
Fundamentally different in its approach. Kyoto had top-down binding targets mainly for rich countries.
And Paris?
Paris introduced nationally determined contributions, or NDCs.
So countries decide their own targets.
Exactly. It's country-driven. Each nation sets its own climate action plan based on its own circumstances. It's bottom-up.
But how do you make sure it adds up globally?
Well, the Paris Agreement provides a framework for transparency, for reviewing progress, and crucially, a ratchet mechanism to increase ambition over time. Every 5 years, countries are expected to submit stronger NDCs.
So bottom-up plans within a global framework that pushes for more action.
That's the idea. Plus, an enhanced transparency framework to track everyone's progress.
Okay, so Paris sets the new direction. What happened next?
Well, the years after Paris were about fleshing out the rules. Marrakech, COP22 in 2016, focused on moving that Paris rulebook forward, getting the operational details sorted.
Then Bonn, COP23 in 2017, that was presided over by Fiji.
Yes, which was significant, a small island state on the front lines. Bonn introduced the Talanoa Dialogue, a more facilitative storytelling approach to discussion.
And the One Planet Summit.
That was about mobilizing finance, particularly private finance, for those national climate plans, the NDCs.
Then Katowice, Poland, COP24 in 2018.
Katowice was crucial for adopting the Katowice Climate Package, basically the detailed operating manual for the Paris Agreement.
So putting the meat on the bones.
Exactly. And this built on that stark IPCC special report about the impacts of 1.5 degrees warming. Added urgency.
Madrid, COP25 in 2019. Still working on the rules.
Still ironing out some key details, yeah. Especially around market mechanisms under Paris, Article 6, and finance issues, some things remain unresolved.
And finally, Glasgow, COP26 in 2021. Delayed, but it happened.
Yes, delayed by the pandemic. Glasgow was billed as critical for ramping up global ambition, finalizing the Paris rulebook, and boosting collaboration on getting to global net zero and adapting to impact.
Yeah, that's quite a journey through the diplomatic history.
Decades of it.
So, we have these agreements. Yeah. But how does it all translate into action? What are the tools?
Right, the mechanisms. This is where the policy hits the ground, so to speak.
This is where understanding how it works becomes really valuable for you listening.
Definitely. These are the practical engines driving things forward.
Let's start with the money. The financial mechanisms seem key.
Absolutely critical. The Green Climate Fund, the GCF, is probably the biggest player established under the UNFCCC.
What does it do?
It supports developing countries with projects for both mitigation cutting emissions and adaptation coping with impacts. Big projects, small projects.
And the Adaptation Fund.
That one focuses specifically on concrete adaptation projects in the most vulnerable developing countries. Things like drought-resistant crops or coastal defenses.
We also mentioned the GEF.
The Global Environment Facility. It's actually the main operating entity of the financial mechanism for the convention itself. It funds broader environmental projects, including climate change.
And there were others. SCCF, LDCF.
Yes, the Special Climate Change Fund and the Least Developed Countries Fund. Also under the convention, targeting specific needs, technology transfer, adaptation, helping the poorest nations.
So a whole architecture for climate finance.
Exactly. It's designed to ensure that developing nations, often hit hardest but with fewer resources, get support to act. The source calls it the climate finance architecture, this whole network of flows.
Okay, money is crucial. What about other specific approaches? REDD Plus came up again?
Yes, REDD Plus isn't just an outcome, it's an active mechanism, providing incentives, often financial, for developing countries to keep their forests standing.
Reducing deforestation, degradation.
And also enhancing forest carbon stocks, managing forests sustainably. It's vital because forests suck up so much CO2.
Makes sense. The source also talks about climate-smart agriculture. What's that?
It's an approach trying to achieve three things at once. One, sustainably increase farm productivity. So we have food security.
Okay.
Two, make farming systems more resilient to climate change, droughts, floods, etc.
Adaptation for farmers.
Right. And three, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture itself where possible, like methane from livestock or nitrous oxide from fertilizers.
So tackling food security and climate change together.
That's the goal, helping farmers adapt while potentially lowering emissions.
Then there's this idea of a green economy.
Yeah, that's a broader concept. The idea is economic growth that doesn't trash the environment. Growth coupled with environmental integrity, poverty reduction, social development.
Breaking the link between growth and damage.
That's the aspiration. And related is TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity. It tries to put an economic value on nature's services like pollination, clean water, carbon storage, so those values get factored into economic decisions, not just ignored.
So recognizing nature's economic contribution.
Exactly. A more holistic view. Environment and economy aren't separate issues.
Okay, one more mechanism. The NGGIP. National Greenhouse Gas Inventories Program.
Yes, crucial for the plumbing of the system.
Plumbing?
Well, its job is to help countries maintain accurate national greenhouse gas inventories. Basically, detailed accounts of their emissions.
Measuring and reporting.
Precisely. It develops the methodologies, the guidelines. This is absolutely fundamental for transparency and accountability. You can't manage what you don't measure accurately.
So everyone uses the same rule book for counting emissions.
That's the aim. Essential for tracking progress towards those NDCs and global goals.
Right. So we've covered the big agreements, the timeline, the mechanisms, UNFCCC, Kyoto, Paris, GCF, RED plus NDCs. Lots of acronyms.
It's a complex world.
But why should, someone listening care about all this diplomatic machinery and technical stuff?
Well, if we connect it to the bigger picture, it matters because these global frameworks, they directly influence national policies.
Like energy policy or transport policy.
Exactly. They shape funding for projects not just overseas, but potentially impacting innovation here. And ultimately, they steer the course of our planet's climate.
They're the structure that lets countries actually work together on this massive global scale.
Without this structure, coordinated action would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. It affects everything, from local weather patterns eventually to international trade rules.
So it shapes how countries cooperate on cutting emissions, adapting to sea level rise, dealing with extreme weather.
And it spurs innovation, green tech, sustainable farming, forest protection. It really is about building a collective future.
A more resilient one, hopefully.
That's the goal. And it's crucial to remember it's not static. It's an ongoing process.
Always evolving.
As the source shows, these agreements get reviewed, tweaked, adapted to new science, new challenges. Understanding the structure helps you make sense of the news, evaluate progress.
And cut through the noise, maybe?
Critical thinking is essential with so much information out there. Knowing the framework helps.
Well, that really was a deep dive, wasn't it? Into Climate Organization's international policy evolution.
From the UNFCCC Foundation to Paris and beyond, and all those mechanisms making it happen.
It's clear it's a massive ongoing global effort. Really complex.
And we've seen how, knowledge gets turned into action plans, how different viewpoints come together, sometimes clash, and how critical thinking has to underpin the whole thing. It's one of humanity's biggest challenges, no doubt.
So to leave you with something to think about, here's a final provocative thought. Given all this complexity, the constant evolution, what single aspect do you think is most crucial for speeding up progress in the next decade?
Is it finance, technology, political will? NDCs?
And maybe what role do individuals like you play within this huge global picture? Something to mull over.
There's always more to learn, of course. But we hope this deep dive has given you a really solid foundation for, your own continued exploration.